Hello, everyone. This is Alan Stout from the Music on the Menu radio show. I had done a couple of podcasts from home in the early months of COVID-19. The radio show was off the air for a bit when the casino was closed. So I did 19 podcasts during that time, interviewing people from the local music community, talking about how they were dealing with the early days of the crisis. And, I enjoyed doing it. We were all stuck at home trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And so talking about it with those folks, was therapeutic for me and hopefully therapeutic for them. They're all up on YouTube, and they've also been donated to the Luzerne County Historical Society, who are actually looking for some items like that. I saw something in the newspaper that they were looking for audio documentation of COVID, and so I donated all of our podcasts to them. But I haven't done one since then. The radio show got back on the air not long after that, and that's really what I do now with music. Obviously, I had written about music for newspapers for almost 20 years and still freelance once in a while with an article. But the radio show is really, where my heart is, putting local bands on the radio. So I haven't done a podcast in, probably a year and a half from home. But the Beatles Get Back documentary, which is currently showing on Disney Plus, has sort of inspired me to do one. Some of those podcasts that I did, there were 19 interviews that I did during COVID. And then there were 5 or 6 of them that I just called the podcast from home. And that's where I just talked about some of the rock documentaries that, I was watching during lockdown, and just talking about music, top 10 albums, fun stuff like that. And Get Back has inspired me to do one. And so this is the first time, like I said, in about a year and a half, but I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about the Get Back documentary. I just finished watching it tonight, and so I watched all 3 parts, all 8 hours or so, and, some of my thoughts on it, really, first of all, one of the things that I do love about social media are how the algorithms recognize what you like. I mean, you click on a lot of Beatles stuff over the years, and somehow, Facebook figures that out, or Instagram, or whatever it is. And so your newsfeed gets pumped up with all this stuff. So I've been reading stories about Get Back, going back to a couple days before, I guess, Thanksgiving, when some of the people got to see an early, some of the reviewers got to see it before it premiered and wrote some commentaries on it. And I've continued to get them, 1 or 2 a day. And I read a lot of them, and I enjoy it. I enjoy reading other people's input on it, their thoughts on it, their commentary on it. So many of my friends, obviously, that I've made over the years through my work are musicians or people that work, in radio and around music, record producers, studios. And so, I've been reading everybody's posts about Get Back and commenting on some of them and having fun. It's a lot of fun talking about the Beatles with people, all these years after they've disbanded. It's more than 50 years ago. And yet they still have this incredible impact. So I love the algorithms. They certainly kept Get Back on my radar. I certainly knew that it was coming out on Thanksgiving because, my news feed wouldn't let me forget about it. But I remember seeing the Let It Be film, which I guess a lot of people really haven't seen, because I guess I didn't really realize how rare it was, because I saw it a couple times back in the 80s. I used to go to the midnight movies at the Wyoming Valley Mall, and I was in high school at the time, and, you weren't old enough to drive after midnight at that point. And even if you were, no good parent would let their kids drive after midnight. And I had great parents. And so they would take us, they would drop us off up at the mall at 11:45 and pick us up at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning after the movie. So that's where I saw Tommy and Quadrophenia and The Kids Are All Right and Let There Be Rock, Let's Spend the Night Together, The Wall. And one of those films that I saw was Let It Be. And being a big Beatles fan, even back then, and, being 15 years old in the early 80s, I couldn't wait to see it. I knew that it was about the Beatles making a record. How cool is that? I've always been fascinated by studios and the recording process, and here's the best band in the world making a record. And I guess anybody will tell you the movie fell flat. I remember it being a very quiet movie, and it wasn't particularly, captivating. The negative vibes that, comes across in the first section of Let It Be, or of Get Back, I'm sorry, where they were still in the television studio, that seemed to be the thing I remember the most about the movie. A couple years later, when VHS tapes came out, I actually worked in a video store for a while. And I worked there for quite a few years, and we had Let It Be. And so I dubbed it, and I actually had a copy of the movie for a while. I wish I hung on to that, because now obviously it's out of print and you can't buy it anymore. Because I guess what happened was the Beatles, the surviving Beatles, didn't even want it out anymore. They were not happy with the film. And it was grainy, and the quality wasn't that good. And, I could never really figure that out either. Why is footage that at that point, when I saw the movie, was only 14 years old? The stuff was shot in 69. I probably saw it in the theater in 82, 83. Why did it look so old? Well, I guess it just wasn't, preserved properly. So first thing when we talk about the Get Back film is that in itself, the clarity of the film is unbelievable. It looks like the Beatles are in your living room, and it looks like it was shot yesterday on high def film. So, Peter Jackson, the director, and his crew, his team, cleaned that film up and gave it the justice that it deserves. And it changes the way you watch it. You don't feel like you're watching ancient history. You feel like it just automatically makes it feel more contemporary. I've noticed that with some other documentaries I've watched, with some stuff on the space program and the NASA. I saw some stuff of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins getting on Apollo to go to the moon, and it just looks so incredible. It looks so pristine, and that's how it should be. That's historic stuff. Take good care of that film. Preserve it properly. And so Peter Jackson and his team have done that with the Get Back sessions, the Let It Be sessions. That alone is we should have gratitude for, because you've never really seen the Beatles towards the end of their time as a band like this. It is really something to see. And the funny thing about it is, I think some people that make documentaries, they want that older, grainy look to give it a sense of time. I was watching a documentary on the NFL Network a couple years ago about Troy Aikman. I'm a big fan of Troy's. He was, obviously I'm a Cowboys fan, so I watched it. And they were showing some high school footage of him in the documentary. And Troy's he's about my age. I think he's a year or two older than me. So Troy's probably like 55. So he's playing high school around 83, 84. They had good camcorders back then. You could shoot quality home video that, if you converted to DVD today, would look great. And this stuff from Troy Aikman playing high school football looked like it was shot in like 1935. And I couldn't figure out why. And so I asked a buddy of mine, Lonnie Miller, who worked at WBRE as a videographer for years. I remember watching that documentary about Aikman, and I text him, I go, why does this Aikman footage look like it's from pre-World War II of him in high school? And he goes, oh, they do that. It's an artistic thing they do. They want it to look older, to give it a sense of, we're looking back in time through the time capsule. I hate that. It's not necessary. If it, let us see it how it was. I want to see quality color video of things from the past. The first time those old color videos showed up of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig that no one had ever seen before, I guess in the 90s, someone unearthed all this great color. It was eye-opening because you got to really see more so what they really looked like. And so I could just go on forever about just the clarity of the video of the Get Back film. That's just something in itself that anybody who's a fan of the Beatles would appreciate. I also think we all feel that the idea that this was a band that was, when they were recording in 69, early 69, didn't like each other. That it was really the end of the road, and they were not friends anymore, and they were just kind of going through the motions. And my recollection of seeing the original Let It Be film is that that's kind of how it was portrayed, because for whatever reasons, out of 60 hours of film, they choose 80 minutes of sort of the gloomy, downtrodden stuff. Well, Peter Jackson got to look at all 60 hours of film and realize that wasn't the case at all. And that's very reflective in his movie. It is, you see the friendship. I love the fact that they walk in every morning and say, "Good morning, lads. How are you today?" And then they kid around, and they're certainly when they were in the television studio in the beginning of the film, there was a whole different vibe. Once they moved over to Apple, to more familiar territory, they really felt comfortable, and you could see everything really start to get moving. But there was, these guys had been friends at that point for, 12, 13 years. They had been in the biggest band in the world already at that point for 7 or 8 years. They had been through everything together. And so that comes through. They were respectful to each other. They tried to be respectful of each other's feelings. When George Harrison briefly quits the band, Paul, John, and Ringo all hug one another and decide that they're going to go talk to him the next day, and they got to get their friend back into the group. They could have had anybody in the world to play guitar in the Beatles. They joked about, and maybe they weren't even joking, about getting Eric Clapton, but that's not what they wanted to do. And they went back and they got George back right away, and they made some agreements to keep him in. George didn't want to do this big live glitzy concert, and they said, "All right, we won't do it. George don't want to do it, we're not doing it." That's kind of cool. And you learn all that stuff from watching this film. One of the things that I love seeing too, and I don't talk about this that much when I do my radio show or when I wrote about music for the newspaper, but I played in an original band when I was about 18, 19, 20 years old for a couple of years. And seeing the Get Back film, I had so many memories of that time when we were sitting around with our instruments working on songs, because I didn't realize that, I guess maybe all bands do this. I thought it was just our thing that we did. But if you're working on a song for too long, and you just need to check out of it for a couple of minutes, inadvertently what somebody will do in the band is they'll start jamming some other song. And it could be one of your favorite, a cover song of something that you love to do. And so seeing the Beatles, all the time during these sessions, just stop. We're not going to work on Don't Let Me Down anymore, or I've Got a Feeling. They'll just start jamming some Everly Brothers song, or an old Elvis Presley song, or even one of their old Mop Top songs from their own catalog, going back to the early 60s. I just thought it was so cool to see them. And one guy starts and everybody joins in. And it really did remind me of when I played in the group that I played in, because the other guys in the band, when I played, they had all had their instruments longer than I did. They got theirs when they were like 14. I didn't get mine till I was like 17 or 18. And so I'm sort of the novice bass player in the group, and these guys are a couple years ahead of me. They're writing the songs, but they're good friends of mine. And so we had a lot of fun, but they would be working on the arrangements of tunes, and we'd all be sitting around in our little rehearsal room, jam room, practice room, and I'd be noodling over in the corner on my bass, and I used to like to surprise them by showing them a song that I learned on my own, that I just picked up by ear. And so one of them was, Heard It Through the Grapevine, Marvin Gaye, which is a pretty easy bass song, obviously. But if I felt that we needed to stop working on this song that we were working on, this original, and just deviate for a minute, I would just go do. And all the guys would stop and look at me. I remember the first time I did it, and they're like, oh, Alan knows Heard It From the Grapevine. And then they all would just kick in and start jamming it. And so we have like this metal version of Heard It. Another one was Windy by The Association. Do, 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 do. So these guys are starting to get on each other's nerves. They're kicking around this song for a half an hour. They're starting it. They're stopping it. They're talking about it. And all of a sudden I'll just bust into the Windy from The Association, and everybody would look at me. And they'd stop, and we'd all start jamming Windy from The Association. So these are the for me personally, the Get Back movie reminded me of that, and seeing the Beatles do stuff like that. Anybody that ever played in a band, particularly an original band, where you were working hard on your own stuff, but sometimes you just needed to check out and break from that. It was really cool to see that the Beatles did that too. The best songwriters of all time, the greatest band of all time. And they're working on this song for a while. And all of a sudden, John or Paul will break into the Everly Brothers or an Elvis Presley tune. And they all just went with it for a while. And I just loved that part of the movie. That was so cool to see. The Yoko Ono component to the film. It's cool because Yoko's getting a break. I mean, Yoko's been, maligned for years as, she was in the studio and she was intrusive, and watch the movie. She sat there quietly. There were lots of people in the studio in and out all the time. There was a whole team of film people there and production people there, and she was just sitting there. And, when they were screwing around, sometimes she would get on a microphone and just do this kind of primal scream thing, and Paul McCartney and the guys didn't seem to mind it at all. So certainly that's another thing everybody's looking at a lot differently. Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles. Well, you could see that the guys really didn't mind having Yoko around. Now, in fairness, if you read on a little bit, when they went on to do the next group of sessions that made the Abbey Road record later in that year, I guess it did get a little out of hand. They were in a car accident, and she was bedridden, and John had a bed brought into the studio, and she was laying in a bed in the middle of the studio, and he had a microphone hung up over the bed so that she could weigh in on the sessions. And at that point, yeah, I think that the other guys in the band were probably, well, this is a little bit much. But that was, right before the group disbanded. And still, look at the results. Look what happened. They made Abbey Road. And so, how disruptive could she have been? I mean, so, just the fact that we're all talking about that big little cloud that's hung over the Beatles towards the end. Oh, Yoko Ono was the reason. Watch the Get Back movie, and you're gonna reevaluate that whole thing. Billy Preston. They're deep into the sessions, and, George Harrison, I think, was invited Billy to come down. They had met him years earlier when he was playing with Little Richard, and things just start happening right away. I mean, he starts adding his touch to the tunes, and oh man, I think one of my favorite, it might be my favorite part of the entire film, is when they start jamming with Billy Preston, and they're working on Don't Let Me Down and I Got a Feeling. And John and Paul, the joy on their face, looking at each other, looking at their instruments, the vibe that they've got, the songs really start cooking. They really start getting into a groove, and it's a moment. It's just a moment. It's just a beautiful moment in the studio where, they've got the talent, they've got the songs, they've done this before, they've made great albums before. They're on a tight deadline with this one. They're struggling a little bit internally. They talk about that with each other openly. And Billy Preston comes in, and I don't want to say he saved the day. I'm sure they would have finished the record, but it certainly adds to the music. It added to the atmosphere. It improved the songs, and I think it improved the morale of the entire project, and that's important. And so to see that was just unbelievable. And to see it as it happened. I mean, there's so many moments in the movie where you're seeing it in real time. The scene where the other guys are all, in one of those, they're kind of goofing around modes, and Paul, it's in the beginning of the movie, and Paul really wants to get this project rolling. He writes Get Back, like on the spot. He's jamming, he's jamming some chords, and he's just fiddling around on the bass, and he's writing the lyrics, he's improvising them as he goes along, and you see the song. You see the first blueprint of the song come together within a couple of minutes off the top of his head. And it's on film. You're watching it happen. And so, what a treasure. Just, what a treasure. Little things. Heather Eastman, who was Linda's daughter. She's about 6-7 years old in 1969. She's in the studio. She's playing on the floor. The guys are playing. They're actually working on a song. The deadline's getting closer to getting this concert done and getting this thing wrapped up. And she's banging on Ringo's drums, and she's practically sitting on John Lennon's lap while he's playing the guitar. And at one point, Paul's tossing her up in the air, playfully, just, having fun with his girlfriend's daughter, and has her sitting on his lap at the piano. And it's just a great moment where you realize that how comfortable they were with each other and with friends and family, and really how good they were, that they didn't have to say, okay, everybody out of the room, we're working on a song now. It's okay. You saw Ringo's wife pop in once or twice during the movie, and George's, and children, like I said, little Heather playing around on the floor, literally crawling around over the chords while they're making the record or working on the tunes. One of the great things about the Get Back film, you really got a sense too, of course, through the whole thing, it was Paul McCartney that was trying to lead the project. Their manager, Brian Epstein, had died, and they didn't have a manager. And so somebody had to, be the leader or play daddy, the father figure for a while. Paul was clearly the one to do it. Mindset wise, really, I didn't get the impression that Paul was on any kind of drugs or anything during any of the film. He pretty focused, pretty clear-headed, trying to get things done, and did get things done. He wasn't comfortable with it. And he talked about that at one or two points in the movie. He even told the other guys, I don't really want to be doing this. But he did it. And if you didn't think you could love Paul McCartney any more than you already do, you will after seeing this film. Because his dedication to the band and his talent just absolutely shines through. John Lennon comes off in a different way, but you'll also love John, maybe more than you already did, because you could see him flip the switch. And sometimes in the studio, you got the impression that John was bored. John was always one of the first guys that would break into a goofy vocal voice or break into one of those old Chuck Berry or Elvis Presley songs or something, and just try to. He was the one that wasn't always just maybe, hey, I want to finish this song today. Yeah, but when it got closer to their deadline, you saw him flip the switch, and you saw him harnessing that focus. You could see it in his eyes. You could see it in his demeanor. You could see it the way he was sitting around holding his guitar. And when they get up onto the rooftop for the concert, John's incredible. I mean, the way he projects his singing, the harmonies, the focus. And so you kind of wonder, well, was he that good that he just knew all along? Yeah, I'll be ready when you need, when you need me. And so when they got up to the rooftop and, it was game time and he knew that, this is when it counts, he was incredible. And seeing him and McCartney interact with one another during that rooftop concert, looking at each other and harmonizing together, and knowing that the band is going to be done, by the end of that year, or within a year or so, it's just wonderful that it was captured that way, and the way they care about each other. Like I said, George would come in with a song, or Ringo would come in with a song, Octopus's Garden, and George would give it some attention. And, George had a lot of good songs. I mean, you could hear some of the early versions of Something in the movie, and All Things Must Pass, which didn't even make it onto the Let It Be record. But certainly that group as a unit was very much intact in January of 1969. A little bit disjointed, yeah, but at one point, John's talking about Apple, the studio. This is in the third part of the film. And he says, I can't wait to keep working here. He loved the studio so much. There was no indication that they weren't going to be working together as a band for a long time. I also love the part where McCartney says, well, we got to do more than just make records. I mean, all we do is make an album, and then we make another album, and George doesn't want to do films anymore. And you certainly got the idea that George didn't really like to play live that much. And so Paul's trying to figure out what they could do more, and John Lennon looks at him and kind of says, well, making albums is that's what we do. And I love that, because that is what the Beatles did, better than anybody. So if you didn't think you could love them any more than you already did, you will. If you didn't think you could learn any more about them that you already knew, you will. And to quote John from the end of the concert, once again, they have passed the audition.